We are exploring the AI rainforest, a space where we discuss a variety of intersecting topics like large language models, use cases, AI agents in Web3, reputation, and the innovative businesses and people at the forefront of this burgeoning space. Each episode features an expert in their field who shares their thoughts and opinions with us. Hey everybody, today on Exploring the AI Rainforest, I'm joined by Nikhil Raghuvira, co-founder and CEO of Predicate, a company that's building policy infrastructure for blockchain applications. With a background that spans public policy, Web3, and ethics, Nikhil brings a unique perspective to the conversation around how we encode values into code. Predicate is working on a powerful framework that allows developers to define and enforce rules on-chain, things like AML checks, geo-restrictions, or behavioral limits, all in a composable way. In this episode, we're going to talk about Nikhil's journey from policy to protocol, the role Predicate plays in shaping on-chain accountability, and what it means to build for values expression in the next era of on-chain financial products. Nikhil, welcome to Exploring the AI Rainforest.
Thanks for having me, Derek. Really excited to have this conversation.
Good, me too. So, not really your roots, but if you can, let's first start with your background in public policy and work at institutions like the Atlantic Council and the Celo Foundation. How did that experience inform your decision to build Predicate?
Yeah, so taking even a slightly step before that, so I started my career in economic consulting in the litigation space on securities and antitrust. And then also spent time in management consulting where I focused on public sector, private equity, and pricing strategy. So these are the kinds of things that then led me into Celo, Web3, crypto, where at Celo, I was focusing like my interest in early blockchain technology back in 2017, 2018, was particularly around payments and the ability of having a more efficient and inclusive financial system. That was something that Celo was really honing in on. But you're really at the end of the day building a new financial stack, right? A completely new technology base that you're saying will be the new global financial settlement system. Right. And so that, of course, lends itself into policy, where it's how do we even think about the policy implications of digital assets? And, this spans both, permissionless blockchains, more centralized kind of Web3 financial products, and then also central bank digital currency. But really, it was this idea that, look, like, if you're building a new financial stack, there is a technology component, there's a business component, but there is also the policy component because you are thinking about new ways of how people are transacting with one another. And you have different organizations across, all different jurisdictions that have to think about what are they building and what can they not build.
Okay. Were you focused mostly on like US policy, or did you also have like a bit of a global perspective there as well?
Pretty heavily focused on US policy at the Atlantic Council. It was primarily around, it was very much US policy around payments, DeFi, like how should we be thinking about DeFi? And a lot of this is less around I would say the policy specifically to start. It's more so just even explaining how the technology works in the first place. Like you have to start with that, right? So what is the difference between a decentralized exchange versus a centralized exchange? In 2021, that was something that has to there's a lot of nuance there. And so being able to explain that first is really important before even getting into what are the specific policies that you should have in place, the laws. I mean, now we see all these things such as in the US, such as the Genius Stablecoin Act, the Clarity Bill for market structure. But even before we can get to those things, you have to spend a few years at least doing just explaining how the technology works, explaining why it matters.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm having a hard time now explaining to Apple App Review the difference between a centralized exchange and a decentralized exchange. I don't have a hard time. They're having a hard time understanding. There's no license to run Uniswap, right? Like there's no license behind this decentralized pool set of token contracts with pools deposited by liquidity from random people all over the world. I have no control over that. I'm just trying to embed it in the application because it's already running on a blockchain, and I can get to it from Safari, no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's trial and error sometimes. It really depends on who you actually run into on the app review team. I think we need to take one more step back because I've heard of the Atlantic Council before, and I suspect some other people listening to this have as well. But what is the Atlantic Council, and how did you end up there?
Yeah, the Atlantic Council is just a DC based, Washington DC based think tank, and so there's many of them, right? So there's the Atlantic Council, there's Brookings, there's the Council on Foreign Relations, American Enterprise Institute. There's a lot of different ones. So yeah, the Atlantic Council is one of them. And how I got involved there was I was in graduate school and was doing a lot of research on digital assets actually, and this was back in 2020, and so there wasn't a lot of kind of research and content on digital assets. It was still quite early. And so, yeah, that's how I got involved, was just publishing articles and reports for the Atlantic Council as it relates to digital assets and what are the policy implications for different
Okay, and then how did that turn into your role at the Celo Foundation?
Yeah, so I was already planning to join Celo at the time, and I was basically I was a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council as well. So that's something that you're able to do on a part-time basis. And then, yeah, I joined Celo afterwards. And so at Celo, wasn't actually focused as heavily on policy. At Celo, I was head of strategy and innovation. And so what mine and our team's mandate was to really explore and build out new use cases on the Celo blockchain. And so we worked with partners like Mercy Corps, Grameen, different humanitarian aid organizations and others to build out new use cases on the Celo blockchain. So things such as payments, microfinance, humanitarian aid, those kinds of things. And then I shifted over to essentially kind of operating a bit like the head of ecosystem. But specifically, my role was supporting major launches on the Celo blockchain. And so these were things like Uniswap, Layer 0, Axelar, USDC on Celo, trying to think of some of the work that Celo was doing with Opera, MiniPay, and getting ready for that launch. So yeah, most of the major launches that happened on Celo from 2021 to 2023 were probably led by me or someone on my team.
That's awesome. So I imagine some of that work, especially with microfinance and payments, probably led to Predicate, but maybe was there a specific moment that kind of sparked the idea of creating Predicate and having these transaction level preconditions to enforce policy? That spark to start Predicate, was that part of that work you were doing at the Celo Foundation?
Yeah, so really the cause of, or how, so my co-founder was also an engineer at Celo, and so the thing that we kept coming back to was, as any group that's building an on-chain application, as they start scaling, one of the big questions is hey, where am I operating? What am I building? And what really are the kind of the different policy, compliance, legal implications that I might have in the technology that I'm building and the technology stack itself? And we would see that for interop, we would see that for RWAs, for payments, of course, for privacy. And so especially as these organizations scale, and we're saying, look, blockchains are going to become the global financial settlement system. And so when you have the global financial settlement system, you of course have permissionless infrastructure. So blockchains can be a permissionless infrastructure. Things like Uniswap can be permissionless infrastructure. But then on that, people and organizations are building financial products on their systems. And then in addition, you have people, coming in from different regulated markets, whether that's the United States, Europe, Singapore, many other markets. They're coming from regulated markets. And so what you're doing is you are building financial products that are navigating and transacting across regulated and unregulated markets. And the thinking was, look, if blockchains are going to scale, if all this is going to scale, you're going to need the ability to enforce policies within your financial application. And of course, even from my policy background, these are the questions that come up a lot, right? Is, hey, how are different organizations solving for these problems? How are the products going to be dealing with this? And so that was really what informed us to work on.
Yeah, this reminds me of a conversation I heard on the Defiance podcast recently. I think it was Sandy Taub from Franklin Templeton, talking about how Franklin Templeton, as a massive financial institution, a financial services institution that operates in a bunch of different jurisdictions, was building money market funds on chain. And they're on 8 different blockchains now, and the efficiencies that they've been able to see there, and they're able to pass that on back to the investors. But needing to enforce KYC, needing to enforce AML, and I mean, I don't know what they're. Okay, well, she talked a little bit about how they do that, but ultimately, obviously, it's still a permissioned business, right? You need to sign up as a Franklin Templeton client, verify your identity. You need to be in a jurisdiction they operate in, that they're licensed in. And she mentioned just expanding into Singapore recently. And I guess what Predicate's building could enable Franklin Templeton like restrictions, I guess in a positive way where needed, without necessarily having to register in every single jurisdiction, or you could do a Uniswap, but make sure you're compliant with AML, especially obviously you're not going to KYC if you want a permissionless system, but you could enforce AML and stuff like that. Like, how does Predicate work in comparison with something like Chainalysis, who is famously constantly analyzing block after block, transaction after transaction to see the source of funds, the current destination, and then potentially blocked at the application layer?
Yeah, so one thing I should say is Chainalysis does not block at the application layer. That's not where their technology is used. So blockchain analytics providers have incredibly robust data and investigation. So we work with many of them, including Chainalysis. We work with TRM, Elliptic, Crystal, among others. Really, at the end of the day, though, what we are building is policy infrastructure that allows you to build and enforce policies for your on-chain application. And so we take that tooling for a developer or an organization and say, wait, how do I build and enforce this? And how do I have the observability, the front end tooling to be able to say what is going through my application and what isn't? It's much more application oriented. So you as a developer and organization can say, look, I want to use Chainalysis data, or I want to use TRM's data for these checks. Enable a marketplace. So you can say, what data do I want to use? What data do I not want to use? And then have all of that enforced in sub-second latency through Predicate. And of course, making sure that we have the robust systems with, let's say a data provider for whatever reason has an outage, you have, resiliency, you have different backup systems and processes in place. Those are the kinds of, as well as a tooling for a developer to be able to seamlessly implement all of these things. And then a compliance officer, a general counsel, or a product manager say, okay, cool, I know what's going on within my application. I have the observability. That's what we do, which is very different from what a blockchain analytics provider here really does. But we, of course, work with them because their data can be used to power a policy through Predicate.
All right. So So you kind of sit between a Chainalysis and a TRM and the application, so that you can take that data in and help the developer actually build those checks and balances before a transaction happens.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because one thing we also found for that for that space is that we saw developers spend time building these systems and then having to manage all of it. And we said, that's not even part of your core business. You should be going and focusing on your core business, which is, selling your product, getting users, getting customers, all of those things.
Right.
That's not the best use of your time if you're going and having to build and maintain your compliance infrastructure. The best example I can give of this in Web 2 is take an OpenAI, right? OpenAI has more money and more engineering capacity than pretty much any other crypto company than any other Web3 organization in the industry, and probably more than many of the organizations in the industry combined, right? That's how I would really think of OpenAI's capabilities. They still go and use, for compliance, they use Persona, which is basically a compliance provider that is able to aggregate, has a marketplace, and is used by OpenAI for essentially pre-transaction checks before someone can log into ChatGPT. So OpenAI could have gone and built all of this themselves, but there's no intention, there's no reason for them to do it, because what they need a product at scale that can solve all of this. Because OpenAI is going to say, look, we're going to have millions and millions of users all around the world, and we need something that is incredibly high throughput and is robust to better enforce our different product requirements for who can log in, making sure they're not getting botted, making sure that you don't have users, let's say, from North Korea. There's a number of holistic requirements. And so they went and used Persona for that. Persona is a company saying, great, this is our focus here. This is where we're going to spend all of our time, our energy, and resources. And Persona also has a marketplace of different data tools you can use. So think of us as kind of saying, look, Web3 companies should not be focusing on that, because if they are, they're probably going to be spending more time and energy and resources on that than they should. And then maybe in the beginning, it's fine, you can do it yourself. But if you ever hit sufficient scale, it's not going to be worth your time anymore. And we've seen this play out in Web2, where it's not worth your time as you scale.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. You're right. There's definitely, I mean, I see it all the time. Companies building up features or services to help support their actual core business when they could farm it out to somebody who actually specializes in that area. And yeah, I see where Predicate's fitting in. I just want to get a little bit more granular about how Predicate works and these rules. So like, you have obviously programmable rules for these on-chain financial products. How does somebody actually define that principle? Like, is it all code level? Is there a no code builder? Is there some sort of hybrid between the two?
Yeah, so right now, the way that a developer would do it today is they would have to actually talk to our team, and we'll set it up for them. So we'll define the requirements and we'll set it up. But what they can do is we do have our front end where they can go and select from pre-existing rules that have already been built by us and that are used by other organizations. So that's the current state. Later this year, going into early next quarter, we'll actually have the ability for a developer to be able to go and define their own rules to be able to build it from scratch. Right now, we just don't have it in place from like a user experience standpoint. They'll be able to define it from scratch, and they'll have a front end to be able to do those kinds of things. So that's where we'll get to later. But at the moment, yeah, they'll have to say what data do they want to use, what are their specific parameters. They, of course, go and integrate Predicate into their smart contract stack. So we don't do that. We just can help them like define the specific policy and say, okay, cool, like here's your policy as per what you need.
Okay, and so you just said it's integrated right into the smart contract. Is there also options to integrate it like at the front end specifically, or at least before? Like, like what are the different options there? Like, I do see the rationale behind doing it at smart contract, I guess, to make sure that even the person can't even get to the like confirm transaction step, right? They've already been or that's when, I guess maybe that's when they're getting blocked. But like, what are the different options there? Is it only smart contract, or is it like API calls or something like that?
Yeah, so there's a few pieces here. So at the end of the day, the enforcement has to happen at a smart contract level, because otherwise it's bypassable, right? Then the rule doesn't, you don't actually have a real policy in place. You're basically kind of creating something in theory, but anyone can go and bypass it with their own front end or just interacting directly with the smart contract themselves. So it does require, at the end of the day, a final setting that a transaction can only go through if it has a signature that's issued from Predicate. So what Predicate does is we issue signatures that are essentially attesting to the validity of a transaction, saying that the transaction meets the set policy. So now the question is how do you get that signature in the first place as a user? So this is where an API call has to be made to Predicate to say, hey, I need a signature from Predicate in order to submit my transaction. That can happen on a front end, for example. So if you go and use, in some like an RWA application that supplies yield, like a vault system, the front end, you might go and interact with the front end. So in that case, the front end, it does involve a front end integration where the front end is making a call to Predicate through an API call saying, hey, this user is planning to submit a transaction. They need a signature. Then when the user submits the transaction, the signature is embedded in the transaction object. So the transaction only goes through then when it's submitted by the user and hits a mempool because they have a signature from Predicate. So yeah, can be a front end integration, but at the end of the day, it needs to be something that is enforced a little bit more deeper in the stack. There's also different ways of getting the signature, right? So one can be an API call to the front end. Another one is let's say you're just using a bot or something like a trading bot, and you're not using a front end. You just have to make an API call to Predicate through the bot. The one exception to where it's a little bit potentially of a different style is when you have intent-based systems, because intent-based systems are actually all doing off-chain kind of basically like off-chain types of execution. And then the transaction finally gets submitted on chain by the intent system itself. So in that case, the intent router would have to make an API call to Predicate before it submits the transaction. So that's where it's a little bit of a different implementation. But again, everything has to be, at the end of the day, enforced on a smart contract level, or the transaction, it doesn't actually work. You don't have a rule. You don't have a truly enforceable policy.
And obviously, if you fall afoul and you say, well, I've done all these things, or I guess a regulator could come in and be like, yeah, but you forgot this incredibly important piece, and so you didn't actually implement your own AML policy
Yeah,
or
and I
practice.
think the good thing here is like even from a regulator standpoint, like policies are meant to be upgradable. So if you need to update your policy as you scale, you hit new markets, the market changes, any of those things you can. And crucially here, you can update your policy without updating your smart contract. So take like a liquidity pool like a Uniswap V4 hook. And so you've set a policy. Now, the value here of Predicate is that if you ever need to change your parameters, you don't need to go and set up a new liquidity pool and migrate all of your liquidity. Instead, you just update your policy and then that's it. You have no smart contract changes you need to make. And this could be your policies using different data, it's different requirements, whatever you need, but you don't have to update the smart contract.
Okay, cool. Can we dive into, I guess, two areas? One, what vertical are you seeing the most success with right now, or the most pickup? And two, what's the most popular use case that they're implementing predicate? What do you call them? I guess policies for.
Yeah. So the core verticals we've been honing in on the most are RWAs, DeFi, so particularly liquidity pools and vaults, uh, privacy, and then more recently starting to look into stable coins as well. So those are the kind of the four key verticals we are really focusing on and where we're getting the most interest. And a lot of these requirements are around things around like anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, so AML, CFT. We started getting questions a little bit more recently around KYC components as well, but most of our work has been primarily in the AML compliance space.
What about is there a lot of demand for geo restrictions, like you were talking about North Korea earlier, or are
Yeah,
there at this point are there better options for doing that?
we do have some use cases around geolocation, but they don't usually by themselves. Like they are I would kind of wrap them into AML components. So for AML, you have flow of funds checks, but then as part of that, you're also putting a geolocation stipulation as well to have like an additional layer. Geolocation can be bypassable though, depending on how you've set up your geolocation, because you might be using something like an IP address, and so that you can have there's ways of bypassing that. So you usually don't just put a geolocation by itself. You need to put an AM like other like flow of funds checks, and the flow of funds checks can be not just sanctioned addresses, but associations with sanctioned addresses. So multiple hops, or not just sanctioned addresses, but addresses involved in terrorist financing, human trafficking,
Right.
child sexual exploitation material, like major cases of fraud, exploits. So that's how I think about it: is you're incorporating all these different categories into what is checked for.
Okay, cool. We touched a little bit on data analytics tools like Chainalysis and TRM, and how you actually work kind of side by side with them. How else would you say Predicate differs from other compliance solution? Like what's happening on chain, or in addition to that, what happens on chain versus what's staying and happening off chain?
Yeah, so I think this is where like really where we're sitting is that the programmable enforcement on chain. And so you have this component that is off chain, which is you're referencing different data sources, and there is an off chain compute-esque type of system where our system is issuing a signature, and the signature can be based off of off chain data, or it can also use on chain data as well. Like on chain data, for example, could be a rate limit, so you only want a certain volume at any given point in given like time period of let's say 24 hours. Or it could be you want to use an on-chain identity. Take like a ZK, like Aztec's ZK passport, for example. So you can incorporate on-chain data, or you can also use off-chain data. But our system operates off-chain and issues signatures on-chain.
Okay.
Uh, so then the on-chain component is a signature itself, as well as the predicate smart contracts that verify that a signature is actually from predicate when a transaction is submitted, because you don't want to have someone fake a signature of predicate and then say, oh, cool, I'm able to get my transaction through. So it's a combination of off-chain and on-chain. And then I think the real differentiator here for us versus other types of compliance solutions in the industry are it's all about on-chain enforcement at a smart contract level, and it is having that sub-second latency, high throughput to be able to meet the needs of things that are operating real time and 24/7. That's the distinction there. Yeah.
Like, how are you achieving that sub-second latency? Are you guys just running tons of NVIDIA H100s in the background to like process this data, or do you have some other special flow that's been tuned to be super super efficient?
It's really the efficiency. So it comes down to, because at the end of the day, what we try to do is keep this incredibly lightweight, because really we're just issuing a signature. So can we issue a signature as quickly as possible?
Mm-hmm.
Then the real limitation, of course, is where are your servers located for issuing a signature? And then the other part is how long does it take to make external data calls? And that's something we can't guarantee, right? So if let's say you asked about like Chainalysis, like let's say we make a data call to Chainalysis to check something. There's a limitation on our end that we can't guarantee a signature is issued in sub-second latency if Chainalysis takes longer to respond. So again,
Right.
this is why having a marketplace of data providers matters, because you want to be able to optimize and figure out who is giving you the response time you really need to be able to do these types of checks. And depending on the different use cases, you might want to use some solutions over others. There are differences here in terms of different data providers and like what is their responsiveness from an API standpoint. Some might be really good with certain types of data, but their API system isn't as good. And so this is why, again, like if you're a developer and you're saying, how do I incorporate this into my application? If you're to do it without Predicate, there is a deep amount of research you have to go and do and say, wait, what exactly are we building? How do we ensure that this is able to meet really the product requirements that we have? And so those are the kinds of things that we're able to do at Predicate.
And you talk about the marketplace of data providers. So, like, are you making it easy for your users to tap into them, or is it more of like a bring your own data provider situation?
It's right now, I would say it's not that you have to bring your own data provider. I can't say from a developer experience standpoint, it's super easy quite yet. That's something that we're actively working on to make that easier, to have like better comparability between different groups, and then also determine like what precisely do you need. It sometimes gets a little confusing and can be a little bit opaque. And so this is where our labs team is also able to help and say, okay, great, here's what we might recommend you use based off of your needs.
Okay. I've got here in my notes that you recently announced a partnership with TRM for decentralized policy infrastructure. Can you explain exactly what that brings and why it's meaningful?
Yeah. The partnership really it's a lot of like what we actually talked about. So how can you enable TRM's data to be used, their analytics data to be used at us, for different on-chain applications? And it's really just the integration between Predicate's infrastructure and TRM's data. It's a really, really good kind of collaboration, because it allows each of us to focus on where we operate best and where is our deep expertise. For us, it is, on-chain infrastructure. For TRM, it's investigations and data and, the relationship with government, with law enforcement agencies around the world, and saying, great, they can really hone in on making sure that the data is really, really good. And we can say, great, how do you actually get that data used within applications across all the different facets? How do we build infrastructure that works with Uniswap? How do we build infrastructure that works with Layer 0? All those kinds of things. We can go focus on that because it's something that TRM doesn't have that type of expertise.
Okay, so Predicate authored a manifesto on values expression, which argues that transactions themselves express values. How does that philosophy shape the product design and your community strategy?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to the fact that what we are building is the ability to enforce different policies and rules. And in our mind, every transaction that we make is a choice that we do as an individual or as a consumer, right? So if I go and buy a pair of shoes, I'm choosing what shoes I want to buy, right? And there's a lot of pieces baked into that. There is brand and marketing. There is, like maybe I don't want to buy real leather shoes. I'd rather buy fake leather shoes. Maybe I don't want to buy shoes that are mass produced, but something that is like smaller batch.
Right.
Maybe I don't want to buy it from, a back alley that has clearly stolen goods, but from a reputable store. Whenever we make a transaction, it's a choice of how we want to transact and who we want to transact with. And so that's really how we kind of see is like when we talk about transaction values is when we're building on-chain applications, there is that part that we have to account for. And we kind of already see some of that, right? Like you might go and use a Uniswap instead of a different DEX, or you might use Ethereum rather than Solana, or you might, use an L2, different L2s for different reasons. And so we have to think really about that. And what for Predicate really is we should be really thinking about how our technology expands what is possible for on-chain applications, because we have to be thinking about our users, where we operate. At the end of the day, we're thinking about real markets, right, and real people. And if that's the case, then you have to account for who are the users, who are the regulators, who are the builders, the organizations. If it's B2B, who are your customers? Everyone expresses values in all different capacities when they have a transaction. And so it's just kind of that philosophy in terms of how we think about things at Predicate when we look at the world.
Okay, I think that's really fair, and I think it's really important that organizations, especially like yours, which is building tooling that might accidentally exclude some people from participating, to be mindful of certain things and obviously have a mission in mind and working towards that mission, as opposed to just blindly building stuff and kind of hoping for the best. So that's really appreciate that. Last couple questions here. I did read the Yahoo Finance announcement from last year. No, not last year, a little bit before that, about raising your $7 million seed round. I think I read in there that you wanted to double the team from about 4 to 7 or 8 people, or 3 to 7 or 8 people at the time, which obviously the team's quite small at that time, but also for the developer tooling, for your network operator base, for compliance tooling. Has there been any other funding rounds since then? And how did that getting that funding help you grow at that time, or really start to put more meat on the bones?
Yeah. We haven't done another round since then, but yes, we definitely did scale our team. So our team size is now 9, so much bigger than what we were then. I think at that time we were like maybe 5 or so. Yeah, so we've definitely scaled our team. At that time, we were not live in production. We are now live in production on Ethereum and several different L2s, with the ability to going live on any other L2 within a day or two as needed. Very easy for us to launch on new L2s. And of course, we have now a front end application. We have the back end infrastructure. We have the SDK, the developer documents, all those things. We didn't have most of that ready at that time. So very different world. We have a different team. We have live use cases with some very large projects. We have a white paper that we published recently with Paxos on how we're building Uniswap infrastructure. So yeah, I would say like a lot of updates since then, obviously, but we haven't done a round since then.
And all of that, which then leads to actual revenue, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which is the lifeblood.
That's right. That's right.
All right, final question. Looking through the rest of this year and into 2026, what sort of emerging on-chain experiences or policy integrations, whether they're governance, identity, reputation, or something else entirely, are you most excited to power with Predicate's stack?
Yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. I'm most excited around particularly the kind of the DeFi vaults and liquidity pool space. I think we're going to continue seeing more and more push on RWAs. And so that to me is interesting, both on more like, I think of RWAs as both stablecoins as well as more like regulated products, such as like money market funds and tokenized securities and things like that. And then the other one I've always been really excited by is still privacy. And I think there's still going to be a lot more work that happens in privacy in the next 6 months to the next year.
What do you think we're going to see in the next 6 to 12 months on the privacy end?
I think we're going to see more groups, some of these other groups launch, right? So Aztec will probably be launching, Maiden will be launching. I think there's some more groups that are focusing on privacy payments, which is valuable. And I think there is a bit more of an emphasis on product-oriented building now versus just pure infrastructure. And so that has to happen for privacy really to pick up. It can't just be infrastructure and then expect that to just magically get adoption. I think you're going to see more product-oriented development, especially in the context of the other topics, right, for RWAs and more on-chain DeFi financial products, it lends itself well to the needs for privacy, as well as like, I think an opportunity to say, wait, we're just baking in privacy for just a financial product that works well. Very similar, we use like many of us use Apple products, right? And Apple talks a lot about privacy, but it's not that we go and use Apple because it's private relative to Android. Exactly. It's that it just is a good product, right? And it has privacy baked into it. And I think that's the world that we'll probably get to more and more.
Yeah, I think so. I was actually talking to a marketer recently, and she's discovered a tool that basically is like a data enrichment tool for wallets, and lets you discover a whole bunch of information about wallets, and not necessarily who's using them, but like, build a more picture that a professional marketer would want around the usage of that wallet. And she's like, isn't this like, super privacy invasive? I'm like, well, yeah, but like marketing companies have been doing this for years with Web 2. You have cookies, you have tracking pixels, you have all these things that, like, you have your IP address, obviously, and the super privacy conscious people will use a VPN, will block all the cookies, or use a pie hole or something like that on their network if they're really conscious about it, like do all these things in order to prevent this sort of thing from happening. And she's like, oh, well, I just talked to like a Bitcoin OG lawyer who like didn't realize this was possible. And I'm like, your Bitcoin OG lawyer needs to read up some more on like all these different technologies. And so, yeah, enabling private payments, private DeFi vaults, still on a public, completely permissionless blockchain, I think would be fantastic, and really open up the doors to people who want to use public blockchains, but for a variety of reasons have shied away from that so far because of the potential privacy implications if a deposit from or withdrawal from a centralized exchange or something like that gets tied to them, not necessarily doxed, but tied to them. So I get it. That's cool. Okay, Nikhil, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If people want to learn more about Predicate, where should they go?
Yeah, best place is to start on our website, so predicate.io. We also have our Twitter, so @0x predicate. So those are probably two places best to learn more.
Cool. And what about if they want to see more of like what you like to say online or things you post?
Yeah, so I would, for that, just follow me on Twitter. And so that is at PUMPERNIKHIL, like the bread. So
Nikhil. Okay, good stuff. Right. Thanks again, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you next time while we're exploring the AI rainforest.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.